Many of you know that I'm a big fan of the motion picture studio Laika, as it produced my favorite movie, Coraline, as well as Kubo and the Two Strings, which I'm also pretty high on. Those two films are probably the most popular ones Laika has created, with the other two, Paranorman and the Box Trolls, sort of being left out. Paranorman was actually pretty well regarded by critics, but it didn't have the same magical touch that was put into Coraline and Kubo. I have never seen the Box Trolls, which you might find strange, but just from the concept itself, it doesn't seem up my alley. I saw Paranorman in the theaters with my hopes pretty high, but it was a huge letdown as only the second Laika movie ever created. But I decided to give it another shot this morning, and now that I have this channel, I found the plot way cooler, especially near the end. And today, I'll discuss the ideas I have, including a massive timeline, the number of curse holders there were, and how Agatha's powers truly work. Ready for a theory? Hey everyone, it's CTO of the Theory channel. I have to say that for the first 45 minutes of the movie, I wasn't invested at all, thinking that the plot was moving way too quickly, and that there was little substance to the actual necromancy-like concept. But those 45 minutes were worth it once I came to the scene between Norman and Agatha. Spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen Paranorman, and I really recommend watching it before watching this video. Anyway, what I want to do first is simply establish a large timeline from the birth of Agatha in 1701 all the way to the events of Paranorman in 2012. So let's get started. A man with the last name of Prenderghast marries and has a child in the year 1701. The couple names the girl Agatha, and by the time Agatha is 11 years old, she has developed varying talents of witchcraft and necromancy. Agatha definitely has a brother, older or twin, as that would be the only way for the Prenderghast name to be passed down so many times. When rumors come up about her mysterious yet unnerving abilities, Agatha is sentenced to her death by 7 court judges. She doesn't go down without a fight though, as before she dies, she uses her powers to curse the judges that will be known years later as the Witch's Curse. Now, here's where the timeline gets extremely vague. We don't know much of anything about the period between Agatha's death and the events of Paranorman, besides the fact that for each year, one of Agatha's descendants read a bedtime story to her on the anniversary of her curse to keep her and the court judges dormant for the time being. What I'm going to do now is attempt to fill it in. The first thing we have to go off is a piece of information from the Paranorman book. It was never made clear in the movie how long a descendant kept their position as curse holder, but according to the book, Mr. Prenderghast was the one to read to Agatha for 50 years straight, meaning that he's been holding the position since he was a child, just like Norman. And something really cool, and possibly not a coincidence, is that both Norman and Mr. Prenderghast became curse holders at 11 years old, and Agatha died when she was 11. It's almost as if that number of years is some kind of threshold for the witch's curse. But going back to the timeline, if Mr. Prenderghast was curse holder for 50 years, it would mean that he started in 1962. But there's still 250 years of a blank slate between Agatha's death and the start of Mr. Prenderghast's term. What happened in those years? Well, it seems as if the necromancy gene skips generations. Neither of Norman's parents can do it, and because it's his great uncle who can, we can also assume that the gene doesn't flow in a direct family line. And because only the necromancers are curse holders, that trait must also skip generations. The average generation length in the 1700s was only about 20 years, and the average length now is only about 30. And if we average those two numbers out, we get a generation length of 25 years. This would make complete sense, as Mr. Prenderghast was curse holder for 50 years, precisely double that amount, which would correlate to skipping generations. And if each curse holder had the position for approximately 50 years, it would mean that there were 7 altogether. We don't know who the 1st through 5th were, but we do know that Mr. Prenderghast was the 6th and Norman was the 7th, for about a day anyways. According to this math, Agatha is Norman's great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-aunt, 12 generations older. After Norman becomes curse holder, he decides to finally put a stop to the nonsense by ending the witch's curse and sending Agatha and the court judges to the land of the dead, where they really belong. So that's the basic timeline and most of what I have for today's video. I actually didn't find a lot to theorize on that wasn't already somewhat obvious, especially since other channels have already picked apart the movie's secrets and backstory. But I still have a couple things I want to address and question, starting with who the first curse holder was. Agatha's brother would seem like a logical choice, but if only necromancers can become curse holder, he would have been tried and executed just like Agatha. But one of her relatives would have had to read to her for the first 50 years, no? It just wouldn't make sense though, since no one else had developed Agatha's powers yet, since the gene skips generations, and that's why she feels so alone throughout her childhood, like Norman. Here's my solution though. What if there didn't need to be a curse holder for the first half a decade or so? Remember, Agatha's curse only went into effect after the 7 judges died, which could have been decades after Agatha's death. Another piece of evidence for this is that Agatha has clearly developed her powers since she was only 11. In the courtroom, we see her flicker with bouts of energy and light, but 300 years later, she's managed to create her own thunderstorm. Her abilities took time to grow and master, which is why for the first 50 years or so, no curse holder was needed. This causes there to be 6, not 7, curse holders in total, with Mr. Prenderghast being 5th and Norman being 6th and last. And finally, one last point I have for today is that the last scene of the movie may be more important than you'd think. On the surface, it's just showing how Norman's whole family has finally accepted him for who he is, and even embraced the idea of the dead actually sitting right next to them. But the fact that Norman's still able to see his spirit grandmother is actually pretty huge. It means that the whole concept of the dead still living in the human world wasn't a direct result of the unnatural abilities Agatha had. Without this final scene, I would have assumed that because the witch's curse was broken, there would be no more necromancers in the Prenderghast family, but it's clearly not the case. I would have thought that through some supernatural event, Agatha gave herself powers of necromancy, sorcery, and witchcraft, and that as the Prenderghast family tree grew and grew, her powers got passed down to certain generations. But since Norman is still able to see his grandmother after Agatha's curse was destroyed, we know that the gene will probably not ever completely go away, making it seem like the traits and abilities are more natural than we thought they were. Pretty cool, right? And take a look at this courtroom scene for one more time.
On this day, you have been arraigned for the horrible crime of witchcraft, and it is passed on you, according to your grievous crimes, execution!
I was only playing.
Aye, with fire!
Agatha states that she was only playing, but it seems as if her playful actions affected generations and generations to come. Playing also sounds like she may not have done this on purpose, and that she might have accidentally communicated with the dead in some way. And we all know how frequent the Land of the Dead comes up in movies like this one, The Nightmare Before Christmas, The Corpse Bride, and more. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure to give it a like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss any Laika videos I make in the future. I'll never stop making theories on Coraline, I'll almost definitely upload more theories on Kubo and the Two Strings, and I'll probably come back to Paranorman too. And who knows, maybe I'll even watch the box trolls one of these days. See you later.